The first thing I heard, after 300 years of silence, was a woman arguing with herself about whether it was ethical to eat the last of her bread before she had confirmed the statue was real. She was standing 6 feet from me in the frost-eaten entrance hall of Ashenmere, her traveling pack dropped at her feet, her coat dusted with mountain snow, a small wrapped parcel of bread held in one gloved hand. And she was talking not to me, not yet, but to the air, to the problem, the way people do when they are so accustomed to their own company that they have stopped pretending a wall is not a sufficient audience. "If the statue is only a statue," she said, "then I have come a very long way for a piece of architecture, and I may as well eat." She looked at the bread. "But if the accounts are accurate and there is any chance he is present, then it seems rude to eat in front of someone who cannot." She paused. "Though he has presumably not eaten in 300 years, in which case my one heel of rye bread is not going to be the deciding insult." She put the bread away. I had not heard a human voice in so long that the simple sound of her talking herself through a small moral problem felt like someone pressing a warm hand to the outside of cold glass. I could not speak. I could not move. I was stone, had been stone since the winter of my 320th year, sealed by a curse I had not fully understood until it was far too late to prevent it. But I could hear. I had always been able to hear, from the first year of the darkness to the last, every pilgrim, every scholar, every young man who came to shout demands at my face, every child dared by friends to touch the statue of the mad king. I had heard all of it. None of it had reached me. This woman, still brushing snow from her coat, pulling out a small leather notebook, tilting her head at the hall's vaulted ceiling with the expression of someone cataloging rather than gawking. She was already different in a way I could not name. "Ashenmere," she said quietly, writing something down. "The accounts describe the hall as ruined. It isn't, it's held." She looked around. "The frost preserves it, maybe. Or something else does." She turned and looked at me directly for the first time, and I felt the looking in a way I had not felt anything in decades, a pressure, an attention, something that had weight. She was not beautiful in the way the old paintings that once lined this hall had depicted women. Those portraits, all of them long since faded or stolen, had favored a particular gilded softness. She was precise. Fine-boned, her dark hair pinned practically back, ink stains on the fingers of her right hand that no amount of travel had fully erased, a quality of stillness to her face that suggested she spent a great deal of time listening. She looked at me the way she had looked at the ceiling, with a cataloging interest, not the theatrical almost visitors performed. "Right," she said. And then, without preamble, she sat down cross-legged on the frost-dusted floor in front of me, opened her notebook, and began to read aloud from her own notes about the kingdom of Veldenmoor. That was the first day. I should tell you what I was, before I tell you what she made of me. My name is Kaelan. I was the last Alpha King of Veldenmoor, a kingdom in the high mountain range the outer world had long since stopped mapping, because Veldenmoor itself had chosen, 2 generations before my birth, to stop being findable. We were not a hidden people out of fear. We were hidden out of a collective exhaustion with being invaded. My grandfather had built the border silence. My father had maintained it. I had inherited it the way one inherits a house with very thick walls and very particular rules about guests. I had ruled for 43 years. I had a pack, the Ashenborn, 300 wolves and twice as many people, a territory of mountain and pine and the deep river valleys that cut between the peaks. I had advisors, a council, hunters, healers, 2 younger brothers I fought with constantly and loved entirely. I had not yet found my fated mate. The bond had not struck. The mark on my left hand remained its plain, unmarked silver, and my council had begun to treat this as a personal failing, which it was not, but which was tiresome to argue about at every quarter meeting. The curse came from my own arrogance. I will not dress it otherwise. There was a seer, an old woman, not of my pack, who traveled the mountain passes and whose accuracy I had dismissed because I had not liked what she told me. She had come to Ashenmere in the deep of winter and asked for shelter, which I gave, because shelter is not something a king refuses to a traveler in mountain winter. She had told me, in exchange for 3 nights of warmth and food, that the mate mark on my hand would only wake when the person who bore its match had spoken without a single lie to my face. I had laughed. I had said, and I remember this with perfect clarity, the particular shade of arrogance available only to a king who is also, underneath, frightened, that if the universe required honesty as the price of love, the universe would wait a very long time because people were not honest, and I had long since made my peace with that. She had looked at me, she had said, "Then you will wait." And she had made it literal. I do not know the exact mechanism of what followed. I have had 300 years to think about it and have arrived at a partial understanding only. The curse sealed me in stone in the entrance hall of Ashenmere, where the mark on my hand could be seen by anyone who looked. Visitors came. Plenty of them over the decades, over the centuries, some hoping for treasure, some for glory, some for the satisfaction of having found a place the maps had forgotten. Some of them spoke to me. Many of them lied not cruelly, not calculatingly, but in the small reflexive ways that people lie when they feel they are being observed and judged, which is most of the time. None of it reached the mark. I could hear, I could think. I could feel time moving the way a man trapped under ice can feel the current all around him, pulling at everything, but not at him. I had watched 3 centuries of dust settle and shift and settle again. I had listened to the mountain wind change with the seasons. I had heard, very distantly, the sounds of Veldenmoor continuing, the howl signals of the pack, receding over decades as the pack thinned or moved or dispersed, until one winter some 80 years ago when I heard nothing at all, and understood that the kingdom I had governed had become a name rather than a place. I had been alone in the dark for a very long time. And then a woman sat down on my floor and read me her research notes, and the dark was different. She stayed for 3 days that first visit. She did not speak to me as a statue on the first day she spoke near me, which was its own strange intimacy. She read her notes aloud. I came to understand because she always had, it was a habit of processing, a way of hearing her own thinking reflected back. She had been doing it for years in empty rooms, she mentioned, because she had spent most of her career in archive vaults and empty libraries, and the kinds of places that very specifically do not have other people in them. I am not good at people, she said on the evening of the first day, still not addressing me directly, still writing. Or rather, I understand them well enough, I think, but being around many of them for extended periods exhausts me in a way that being around one person does not, which has been inconvenient professionally. She paused. I was a palace archivist for 11 years, not this palace, another one. I catalogued their entire historical collection, reorganized 3 centuries of misfiled land grants, and was politely released when the new court secretary decided that the archive could be managed by someone who was better at attending the quarterly socials. She closed her notebook, looked at me. "I am telling this to a statue," she said, "for the record." I wanted, with an intensity that surprised me, I had not wanted anything in decades, to tell her that the statue was listening, that I had heard every word, that her voice was the first thing in 300 years that felt like it was reaching me rather than moving past me. I could not, I was stone. She left on the morning of the 3rd day, apologized to me directly, for the first time, for taking up residence in the entrance hall without asking, said she was not certain if the courtesy was warranted given that I might simply be marble, but that it seemed worth extending regardless. Then she left. I thought she would not come back. She came back 6 weeks later with more notes, a better coat, and a small oil lamp because, she said, she had felt guilty about having sat in my hall in the fading light without offering me any. "I know you probably can't see it," she said, placing the lamp at my feet, but it seemed rude not to try. I had not seen light in 80 years. The lamp's glow reached the stone of my hands, and I could see it, a warm, small, specific brightness, set there deliberately by a woman who was not certain I was real and had brought it anyway. Something shifted in the stone around my chest, not breaking, not yet, but moving, the way ice moves in early spring when the temperature has not yet crossed the threshold but the pressure has begun. She told me her name on the 4th visit. Myra, she said, without particular preamble. My full name is Myra Caleth, but the Caleth part comes from my mother's second husband, and I have never felt it belonged to me, so Myra is the honest version. She was unpacking her bag, arranging her papers on the floor in the particular organized chaos of a person who has a system that looks like disorder from the outside. I mention this because I have been coming here for 2 months and have been calling you the Alpha King in my notes, which feels unbalanced. I know your name. You don't know mine. She looked up. Kaelan, she said, reading from her notes. Kaelan of Veldenmoor, last of the Ashen-born kings. She paused. I hope that's not presumptuous, to use your name. It was not. It was the first time anyone had used my name in 300 years, and the stone around my throat felt, for just a moment, thinner. She began to talk about her work, not presenting it, not performing it, but thinking through it the way she always did, with the lamp lit at my feet and the mountain wind outside the high windows. She was tracing the history of the border kingdoms that had existed in the range before Veldenmoor's deliberate disappearance. She believed, and she said this with the particular tentativeness of someone who has been told her theories are eccentric more times than she has been told they are correct, that Veldenmoor had not simply sealed its borders. She believed it had, in some way she could not yet articulate, sealed itself outside of ordinary time, and that the palace and I were a remnant of that sealing, not a ruin but a pause. Like a held breath, she said, the whole place, like something is waiting for permission to exhale. I had not thought of it that way. I had thought of it as a punishment, a sealed room, a king's particular hell, but she was not wrong. Ashenmere was waiting. It had always been waiting. I don't know what it's waiting for, she said, but I think it's something specific. She looked at me. I think it's you. The confessions began, I think, because she was lonely. Not acutely lonely, not the sharp kind that announces itself. The slow kind that a person can spend years arranging their life around without quite acknowledging. She would arrive at Ashenmere, and I came to understand, listening, that the visits were not purely scholarly. There was no one she wrote to regularly. There was no one who would notice, particularly, if her return from the mountain was delayed by a week. She had colleagues, people she corresponded with about archive methodology and border kingdom cartography. But she did not have, as she put it one evening, in the careful way of someone being precise about something that cost her something to admit, anyone who was specifically glad she was alive. That sounds more dramatic than I mean it, she said quickly. I'm not suffering. I have interesting work and I am genuinely fortunate and I am aware of that. She paused. I just mean that I have never had the experience of walking into a room and having someone's face change because I walked in. I know that's a common experience for many people, and I don't say this with self-pity. It's just a fact I have arrived at recently about my particular life. She looked at me. You are the longest continuous relationship I have had in 11 years, she said. With a statue I am not entirely certain can hear me, which is either the saddest thing I have ever said or a testament to my comfort with uncertainty, and I prefer the second interpretation. I was not uncertain. I could hear every word. And the ache of that, of being the one she was glad to return to, while she did not know I knew, was the most alive I had felt in centuries. A clean pain, the pain of being present. I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone matter. She mattered. I do not know exactly when it became something that deserved that word. Perhaps the evening she worked through a problem in her research for 3 hours and arrived, alone, at a solution, and looked up at me with the expression of someone who wanted to share good news and had no one to share it with, and said, "I figured it out. Aren't you glad?" and laughed. A short, real laugh at the absurdity of asking a statue that, and then looked slightly uncertain and said, "I hope you are, if you're in there." I was in there. Or perhaps it was the winter evening when the mountain wind picked up and the temperature in the hall dropped sharply, and she sat close to the lamp and told me, quietly, that she was frightened sometimes. Not of specific things. Of the general shape of her life, that it would continue as it was indefinitely, useful and solitary, and that she would arrive eventually at the end of it having done good work but having been, her word, unreached. "I think I am reachable," she said. "I think there is. I think underneath the practical exterior there is something that would very much like to be known by someone. I just don't know how to get from here to there." I knew. She had been getting there slowly for months, every visit, every confession into the dark. She told me about her childhood on a rainy afternoon in the second year. She had been the daughter of a scholar, a real one, she said, meaning a man who had sacrificed comfort for accuracy and had not regretted it, which she considered the defining characteristic of a genuine scholar versus a performer of scholarship. Her mother had been a healer, quiet and capable, who had loved her husband and their daughter with an uncomplicated steadiness that Myra said she had only understood as remarkable once she encountered people for whom such steadiness was not the given condition of love. "They were both gone before I was 30, she said. Not dramatically, just gone, the way things go when they go quietly." She was quiet herself for a moment. "I think I have been trying to find that steadiness in other people ever since and have mostly been unsuccessful, which is probably why I have ended up talking to you." She looked up. "No offense meant." "None taken." "You are very steady," she said, "in a literal sense. 300 years without moving, without changing your mind, without being here 1 month and somewhere else the next." She smiled, the small, private kind, not performed for an audience. "I appreciate reliability." I had never been described as reliable. I had been, by my own counsel's account, opinionated, impatient, prone to deciding things quickly and spending insufficient time reconsidering. I did not think these characterizations were unfair. But I had been reliable, I supposed, in the specific way she meant. I had been here, for every visit, every lamp at my feet, every word into the dark. I began to understand the curse differently in that second year. The seer had not been cruel. She had been accurate in the way that the best teachers are accurate, which is to say that the lesson had been specifically designed for the student. She had known, I thought, that the flaw was not simply my distrust of other people's honesty. It was my distrust of my own. I had spent 43 years as a king, which meant 43 years of presenting a face that was useful rather than true, of reading rooms rather than speaking into them, of never being the one to confess first, because a king who confesses first has given away the thing that keeps him standing. I had built a life, and then a kingdom, on strategic withholding, and the curse had made me stone, had taken the quality I had chosen and made it literal, and then placed outside my frozen self the one thing that could melt it, a person who was constitutionally incapable of withholding anything for long. Myra was the most honest person I had ever heard speak. Not painfully honest, not the aggression of someone who calls cruelty candor, precisely honest. She said true things with the same matter-of-fact care she applied to her research. When she did not know something, she said so. When she was wrong, she corrected herself in the same breath, without the self-flagellation that some people use to make their errors feel more important than they are. She said what she meant. She meant what she said. She had been doing it, I came to understand, her whole life, and it had cost her. People found it unsettling, the straightforwardness, the refusal to soften truth into something more comfortable. But she had not stopped doing it because the alternative was being someone else, and she had no interest in that. Every word she had ever said to me was true. The curse knew it. I could feel it in the way that the stone no longer felt entirely solid, a porousness, a thinning, as if the seal had been made of ice and she had been, without knowing it, bringing warmth every time she came. I needed her to say one more thing. I did not know what it was yet, but I could feel its shape, something she had not yet said, something she was still holding at the edge, the last true thing. She stopped coming for 40 days in the third year, and I came closer to breaking in that silence than I had in the previous 3 centuries. When she returned, she was thinner and quieter, and she sat down on the floor in front of me and did not light the lamp for a long time. "I'm sorry," she said finally. There was some professional difficulty. And then some difficulty that was not professional. And I did not come because I was afraid that if I came I would tell you all of it, and I don't know why that felt like too much. You can't tell anyone. You cannot, I suspect, judge me. But I was afraid anyway. She lit the lamp. I was asked during those 40 days by a colleague who has been kind to me to consider a closer connection, a life together. And I wanted to want it because he is a good man and it would have been sensible, and I spent 40 days trying to want it and could not. She was looking at her hands. And I could not because I am sitting in a frozen palace talking to a statue I have been visiting for 3 years, and it is the most important relationship in my life, and that tells me something, I think, that I am not entirely certain how to face. She looked at me directly. "I think I love you," she said, which I recognize is probably the most foolish sentence I have ever said, and I have said some genuinely foolish things. I think I love you, and I think you cannot hear me, and I think I have arranged my life around someone who is not, in the relevant sense, available, and I think I have done this because love felt safer when it could not answer. She stopped. "No, that's not true. That's the self-protective version. Let me try again." She straightened. "I love you because you listen," she said. "Because you have been here every time. Because I have told you true things for 3 years and you have never made me feel that being true was the wrong choice. Because I am a person who has spent her whole life feeling slightly too much, too precise, too particular, too unlikely to fit neatly into anyone else's life, and in this hall I have never felt that. I have felt met, even though you are stone, even though you cannot answer." Her voice was steady but barely. "I love you because I am most myself here. Because I chose, 40 days ago, a life with someone kind over this, and I could not do it. And when I thought about why, the only honest answer was that I would rather love something that cannot love me back than spend my life pretending to be less than I am." She closed her eyes. "That's the true version," she said quietly. "I thought you should have it, since you have had all the others." The stone broke. Not loudly, not with the drama of a shattering wall. The way ice breaks at the end of winter, a crack that has been coming for a long time, running its full length, and then the pieces simply fall apart, because they were already separate, because the only thing holding them together was the cold, and the cold was gone. I felt my hands first, the feeling returning to them the way feeling returns to something that has been held too long in a frozen place, painful and warm in the same instant, the two things indistinguishable. Then my chest, expanding with the first breath in 300 years, a breath that felt like it contained the entire silence it was ending. Then my eyes, opening to the lamp's small light and the frost-white hall and the woman in front of me who had not yet opened her own eyes, and whose face, close as I could now see it properly, was the face of someone who had said the last hard thing and was waiting, quietly, for the consequences. I said her name. She opened her eyes. She was already moving, not toward me, away from me, the instinctive retreat of someone confronted with the impossible, and I understood it. I did not blame her for it, but I also could not let her go without her understanding. So I said, my voice rough with 3 centuries of disuse, barely recognizable as a voice, more like stone learning to speak, I said. "The bread, you were right. It would not have been the deciding insult, but you put it away anyway." She stopped, turned, looked at me with an expression I did not have a name for, something between terror and the particular quality of a person hearing confirmation of something they had not dared believe. "Your full name is Myra," I said, "and the Caliph does not belong to you, and you are most yourself in this hall, and you have 11 years of ink stains on your right hand that no amount of travel has washed away." I was moving toward her carefully, because my body was new again, unused, full of the strange lightness of not being stone, and I stopped at the distance that felt like the right distance, close enough that she could see my face in the lamp's light, far enough that she had room. "You sat on this floor for 3 years, Myra. You brought me a lamp. You told me everything true." "You heard," she said, "not a question, the statement of someone rearranging 3 years in an instant. Every word." She put her hand over her mouth, not in distress or not only in distress. The expression was more complicated than that. She was, I understood, processing the specific mathematics of having confessed her interior life, unguarded, to someone who had received all of it. "The bread was the first day," she said from behind her hand. "Yes. That was, I had not even decided you were real yet. You extended the courtesy anyway." She looked at me for a long time. I looked back. I had 300 years of looking at her to do, and this was the first moment of it, and I did not want to rush any part. "Say my name," she said quietly. "Myra." She lowered her hand, and the expression that settled on her face, precise, particular, meeting me the way she had always met everything, fully, and without the self-protective softening, was the most beautiful thing I had seen in 3 centuries of dark. "I meant what I said," she told me, "before all of it." "I know. You heard 3 years of me," she said. "I have heard 30 seconds of you." "Then let me speak," I said, "for as long as it takes." I told her about Veldenmoor. Not the formal history she had read in her notes. She knew that already, but the inside of it. The weight of the pack in winter, the sound of 300 wolves on the mountain at the new moon, the specific quality of the valley light in early spring when the snow was still on the peaks but the lower meadows had gone green. The way my brothers argued with me, Davin, the younger one who could never let a point go, and Imric, who rarely spoke but whose silences were more pointed than Davin's words. The council and its 4-hour quarterly meetings. The mate mark on my left hand, silver and unmarked for 43 years, and the particular combination of acceptance and grief with which I had made my peace with it. "I thought the seer was speaking metaphorically," I said, "when she said that my mate would speak without a single lie." She wasn't. She wasn't. Though I think, if I had understood her correctly, I would have assumed she meant a conversation, a specific event, not 300 years of someone talking to stone. Myra was sitting beside me now. We had moved at some point to sit against the wall of the entrance hall, the lamp between us, the mountain dark pressing at the windows, the frost of the hall slowly, almost imperceptibly, beginning to ease. So the curse was waiting for someone to talk to you honestly. To talk to me without wanting anything in return, I said. That was the part I could not do myself. I spoke strategically. I spoke to manage. I had never spoken to anyone the way you spoke to me. She considered this. I was not aware I was demonstrating a virtue. I was largely just talking. Because there was no reason not to. That was the virtue. She was quiet for a moment. 300 years, she said. That's how long you were waiting. Yes. And Veldenmoor, the pack. Gone, I said, or dispersed. I heard the last of the howl signals 80 years ago. I had made my peace with this in the dark, the slow, terrible peace of someone who has had nothing to do for a century but grieve. Whatever comes next is new, not a restoration, something else. Something else, she said quietly. She was not afraid of the scale of it, I noticed. Another person might have been the weight of 3 centuries, a kingdom dispersed, A king woken into a world that had continued without him. She was looking at it the way she looked at a difficult problem in her research, with the clear-eyed interest of someone who finds that reality, even when it is large and uncomfortable, is preferable to a comforting simplification. "What do you need?" she asked. "First, practically." I had not been asked what I needed in 300 years. The question undid me more than I expected. "Light," I said, "and to know you are going to come back." She looked at me steadily. "I always came back." "I know." "Then you know the answer." She went down the mountain the next morning to bring back what was needed, and I sat in the entrance hall of Ashenmere and watched the light change for the first time in 3 centuries. The frost began to ease from the stone as the day went on slowly, as if Ashenmere itself was waking in stages, the curse unwinding in the same deliberate way it had been made. By mid-afternoon, the entrance hall had lost its held-breath quality. By evening, it was simply a hall, cold, old, cleared, but no longer sealed outside of time. I explored the palace while she was gone, carefully, with the tentative awareness of a man learning his body again after long stillness. The rooms I had known were still there, the council chamber with its long table, the library whose shelves were empty but whose shelving remained, the high window in the east tower that had always given the best view of the valley. 3 centuries of dust, 3 centuries of cold. But the bones of the place were intact, and when I stood at the east tower window and looked down at the mountain slopes below, I could see, far down, small against the scale of the peaks, a figure moving upward with a pack on her back in a deliberate, unhurried pace. Myra coming back. I had known she would, but I had not known, until I saw it, what it would feel like to see it, the specific warmth of watching someone choose to return to you freely without needing to be asked. The mark on my left hand had changed overnight. I had not looked at it until that morning. I had been afraid to, perhaps, in case the waking had been something it was not. But in the morning light it was clear and undeniable. The mate mark, plain silver for 43 years before the stone and 300 years within it, had come into itself. A pattern I did not have a word for, something between water and frost, and the moment just before winter breaks, tracing itself in silver and faint blue-white from my wrist to my knuckles, unmistakable. It had recognized her. It had recognized her months ago, I thought, listening. The night she had brought the lamp, perhaps earlier, but the mark, like me, had been waiting for her to say the last true thing. She arrived at the palace door at dusk with a pack full of supplies, stamped the snow from her boots, and looked at me with the composed, slightly uncertain expression of a person who is not certain, in the clear light of a second day, whether the previous night was real. I held out my left hand. The mark was visible in the fading light, clear, specific, impossible to mistake. She looked at it for a long moment. "That's the mate mark," she said. "Yes. I have read about mate marks." She looked up at me. "The accounts say it recognizes the fated mate." "It does." She was quiet, processing, in the way I had come to know the stillness before the conclusion, the mind working through to the thing it already knew. "You are saying that it recognized me." 3 years ago, I said. "Or earlier. I cannot be certain of the exact moment, but the mark knows, Myra. It has always known." She looked at the mark again, then at me, then down at her own hands, the ink-stained right one, the plain left one, and I watched her, very carefully, reach out and lay her fingertips against the mark on my wrist. The warmth that passed between us was not dramatic. It was not a flash or a sound or a visible light. It was simply warmth, shared, the specific temperature of recognition, and I felt it run from her fingertips to the mark and back, and I saw from her face that she felt it too. "Oh," she said quietly. "Yes." She did not remove her hand, neither did I. "I should tell you," she said, "that I am not, as a general matter, someone who makes large decisions quickly. I know, and that the practical scale of this, a woken palace, a dispersed kingdom. 300 years of all of it is not small. I know, and that you have heard 3 years of me, but I have heard 1 day of you, and that imbalance matters to me. It matters to me too, I said. Myra, I am not asking you for anything except this, your presence, your honesty, which you have already given me in full. Time to speak to you as you spoke to me until we are even. I paused. I am a patient man. I have had practice. She looked at me for a moment. The small private smile appeared. That, she said, is the first joke you have made. I have been saving them. She laughed the real laugh, the one I had heard twice in 3 years and had thought about each time until the next. It was better in person. Everything was better in person. I had known it would be in the abstract, but the specific reality of standing in the same light as another person and hearing them laugh because you made them laugh was, I did not have a word for it that was not too large for the moment. I filed it away as the kind of thing that needed to be experienced many more times before it could be named accurately. All right, she said when the laugh had settled. Speak to me then, I'll listen. I know you will, I said. You always did. We worked on Ashenmere together through the rest of that winter and into the spring. She had knowledge. I had memory. She knew the outside world as it had become over 3 centuries, the changed cartography, the new kingdoms that had grown up in the range, the scholarly networks that could be contacted, the practical architecture of a life built in a place that had been sealed outside of time. I knew the palace itself, and the mountain, and the specifics of Veldenmoor's history that no archive had, the names of the people, the shape of the council, the way the valley flooded in spring, and the particular crossing that remained passable when all others were not. We talked extensively. Myra, freed from the particular vulnerability of confessing into a silence she believed could not hear her, was, it turned out, also funny, quick, dry, precise, and sometimes wrong about things, and said so in the next breath, and was right about things she said carefully and without performance, and was curious in the exact way that I found most interesting, which was, toward understanding rather than toward being right. She moved her things to Ashenmere in the early spring. Not without thought, she thought about it in my hearing for 3 weeks, which was, I came to understand, simply how she made decisions, thoroughly and aloud, and then she said, I have been home in this hall since the second visit and I would like to stop pretending otherwise. The mark on my hand had fully settled by then, no longer the bright new clarity of the waking night, but something deeper, the specific silver and frost pattern worn in, as if it had always been there, because in some sense it always had. She noticed it on a morning in early spring, her own hand beside mine on the council table where we had been working, her hand, ink-stained and particular, and mine, the mark clearly present, and she said very quietly, Does it work the other way? The mark. I looked at her left hand. I had not said it aloud yet. I had been waiting, not from calculation, but from the same reason she made decisions slowly, because it was important and I wanted to be right. In old Veldenmoor, I said, when the mark recognizes its match, both people carry it. She turned her left palm over. The mark was there, faint, newer, the ink of it just finding its depth but present, the same pattern, the same frost and water shape running from wrist to knuckle. She looked at it for a long time. When, she said. The first visit, I said, I think you put away the bread. She was quiet. Then, I have had a mate mark for 3 years and did not know it. Yes. That, she said, in the precise, matter-of-fact tone she used for things that were too large for a large tone, is going to take me some time to fully absorb. Take all the time you need. She looked at me. You heard everything I said about having no one who was glad I was alive. Yes. I want you to know, she said carefully, that you are not required to make that right, because you feel you owe me something for breaking the curse. That would be the wrong reason. It is not the reason. Then what is? I had had 3 years to prepare the answer, and 3 centuries before that, and it was still difficult to say, not because it was untrue, but because it was the most true thing, and true things were what had cost us both the most. Because, I said, I have heard you for 3 years, and in 3 years I have never once wanted you to be other than exactly what you are. You are the only person I have ever known to whom that has been true, and that is not debt. That is, I searched for the right word, and found to my surprise that the most accurate one was also the simplest. That is wanting. She held my gaze. The composed face, the precise attention, the quality I had fallen in love with through 300 years of stone, the fullness of her presence, undivided and unperformed. Wanting, she said quietly, as if testing the word. Yes. Then we agree, she said, because I have also been wanting rather persistently for quite some time. There is an archivist's instinct. I have come to understand that Myra cannot entirely turn off, even now. The habit of documentation, of noting the precise details of a thing so that it might be found again later. She has been writing a record of Veldenmoor, not the formal history, but the living one, the kind that includes the detail of what the East Tower window looks like in different lights, and what the mark felt like under her fingertips the first time, and which particular crossing remains passable in spring flood, and how a king who was stoned for 300 years takes his coffee when someone finally teaches him that coffee exists. She has asked me more than once to contribute to it. I am less practiced at documentation than she is. I was a king who governed rather than a scholar who recorded. But I find I do not mind the practice, because it requires me to say true things, and I am, at last, learning to do that. The mark on both our hands has fully settled now. It is not something either of us mentions daily. It is simply present, the way things are present when they have always been true and have only recently been made visible. The mountain is green below Ashenmere this spring. Myra is at the council table with her notes. I am at the window, watching the valley, the same valley I watched for 43 years as a king and 300 years as stone, and it looks different now, not because it has changed, but because I am watching it for a specific reason, which is that I want to tell her when she asks what the light is doing. She will ask, she always asks. And when she does, I will tell her the truth. She has taught me, across 3 years of listening to her do it, that there is no better answer.